Good morning. You guys are looking mighty fine, considering what you went through on Thursday and how many hours you've slept since that time. I don't want anybody falling asleep this morning, all right? Good to see all of you. Welcome to those of you who are joining us online, as well as those of you on seat. As we continue our series, we're talking Table Talk this month, talking about our mission as a church. And we've talked about whether or not we are devoted or we're just dabblers in our connection to God. And then we talked about serve. It's our language of love that we share with the community. And last week we talked about the fact that as leaders, our action is to serve. And this morning we're talking about enlarge the kingdom. Enlarging is what you did on Thursday, but we're talking about the kingdom this morning. We have a very special guest with us this morning. For many of you, our guest speaker this morning is no stranger. At least he's no stranger than he was when he was growing up here. This is Eric Epperson.
Good morning.
Eric grew up here in Muskogee. Gosh, I was just thinking this morning, Eric, it doesn't seem that long ago that I was over at your house on Georgia talking to your mom and dad, and you and Jacob, except you were about that high at that time, and when you first started coming to Boulevard.
I think it was over 30 years ago. I'm not counting, but I think it's been a long. I don't remember that conversation, but it's been a long time.
I don't think it's that long, but maybe 5 or 6 years ago, something of that nature. Eric grew up here at Boulevard, and probably the best decision that Eric ever made, besides accepting Jesus as the leader and forgiver of his life, was somehow convincing Tori to become his bride.
Somehow, yes. You make it sound like it was my decision. It was, my mind was made up. It was
I know yours was made up. I just wasn't sure
I know.
about Tori. Eric married way beyond his capabilities, but like most of us did. Eric graduated from Muskogee, went to Ozark Christian College, served a year as an intern here a few moons ago. Then went to OU, got your master in philosophy. Actually, it was an excuse to get OU football tickets.
It worked,
And then has become a part of Christ in Youth. Was formerly program director for Move, and now you've kind of taken on a new role.
Yeah, so I get to serve the film team. So film, digital media, online presence. We're working with that group to try to tell stories in a digital format.
Well, you've been pretty successful with that.
It's been fun. And I'm surrounded by really good people. Have had an opportunity to tell just a lot of fascinating stories about how God is enlarging the kingdom all around the world. And we really get a chance to, I think, what film and stories are able to do is they're able to captivate the imagination, bring people into what God is doing, and hopefully send them out to make a difference.
And 2 years ago, your short film.
Oh, yeah. So a couple years ago, so we tell stories all over the world. And so we've made documentaries dealing with religious persecution, sex trafficking. We just this past year made a short film in Ireland dealing with mental stress and suicide and depression. It was actually selected and showed in a couple of film festivals in Ireland. Won a film festival in Ireland a couple of months ago. And so from partnerships with International Justice Mission, we made a film in Guatemala that had a successful run as well. It's just fun to be able to take a camera and shine it on some people who are making a big difference and say, this is what the kingdom's all about. This is what enlarging the kingdom looks like. It's just day in and day out serving God and what He's doing. Yeah.
So when we thought about talking about enlarge the kingdom, our table talk, we thought of Eric, and so will you welcome Eric this morning?
Thank you. Appreciate it. So I don't know what it is about life, but I feel like that every time you get everything figured out, something changes and you have to start all over. I think the first time I realized this was in 6th grade. I mean, elementary school had been wonderful, right? I mean, everybody's your friend. The spelling tests are easy, R-E-D, right? There's kickball. And if you want a young lady to be your girlfriend, it's really easy in elementary school. You just go up to her and you say, will you be my girlfriend? If she says yes, you just go about your life. And nothing changes but she's now your girlfriend. It gets more complicated. And then 6th grade happened, and everything changed. All of a sudden, not everyone was your friend. And we had dodgeball. And spelling words like idiosyncrasy, idiosyncrasy, idiosyncrasy. And if you wanted a young lady to be your girlfriend, well, this is what happened to me. So I didn't know everything in life, but I knew that my lifelong quest for love had been fulfilled when Rachel walked into second hour geography. Side note, I'm in my hometown. Of course I've changed the name, right? She's a mom of 3 now who probably works at a bank. But so I walk into second hour geography class, and I'm sitting next to the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. And she sits down, luck would have it, right in front of me. I sit down right behind her. And I tell you, over the course of that semester, I didn't learn much geography. But I did learn a whole lot about what love meant. And I would have conversations with Rachel, and she would turn around and she would say things like, "You're so good at geography," which I took to meant, "I love you, run away with me." This went on for several weeks, and eventually I worked up the courage to say, Will you be my girlfriend? To which she replied, "Well, are you going to the skating rink tonight?" I was not prepared for that response. You see, in those days, anyone who was anyone at Alice Robertson Middle School went to the skating rink on Friday evening. Okay? Up until that point, I had never been to the skating rink on Friday evening. And to be honest, I wasn't really interested in going to the skating rink. It didn't sound like a lot of fun. It wasn't an activity that I just really wanted to do, spend a Friday evening doing. So of course, when she asked, "Are you going to the skating rink Friday night?" I responded, "Yes, I am there." So I went home, told my parents that I wanted to go skating. And later that evening at about 7 o'clock, my mom, a little perplexed by my newfound interest in skating, took me to the skating rink. She dropped me off, got out of the car with $10 in my pocket and all the hope I could carry, and I pushed open the big double doors. And I was there, in the epicenter of the social food chain of Alice Robertson Middle School. Big disco ball hung in the middle of the wooden floor that seemed to stretch forever as what seemed to be thousands of people circled around in unison to a Boys to Men song. Lights danced around the arcade. A swarm of cheerleaders swam by on 4 wheels. And they sold pickles. The biggest pickle you've ever seen for $1. And I walked over to the rental booth and said, "Size 11, please." I was in 6th grade. I wore a size 11. I looked like a capital L. Thank you. And made my way over to the carpeted bench, and I sat down and I looked across the rink, and there she was. Rachel was already there. No rented brown skates for her. No. This was a woman with speed skates. And there she was, an angel on 8 wheels, gliding around the rink. And I knew my time had come. This was the make or break moment. And so I began to untie my shoes. And that's when it hit me. As I slid my right foot into my skate, that I didn't know how to skate. So how did I get here? What am I doing in this situation? Well, I'd received an invitation. And when you receive an invitation, you got to move. And I think Jesus this morning leans around to each of us and offers an invitation to us to follow Him. And if we're truly going to follow Jesus, we probably ought to know where it is that Jesus is going. And if you flip through the first 4 books of the New Testament, we call the Gospels, you'll notice that every single time Jesus pops up on the scene, everywhere Jesus is going, He's working to enlarge the kingdom. If you spend any time in church, you know this. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son. It's a season we're about to celebrate. That's phase 1 of enlarging the kingdom. The Apostle Paul writes it like this in Romans chapter 5. It'll be on the screen. But God demonstrates His own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's the first phase of this enlarging of the kingdom. And to be honest, I'm sometimes afraid that we are so familiar with these types of verses that they lose their offensiveness. That we are so familiar with them that they're no longer scary, because there's some pretty big pronouns in that text. Us, we. Those are inclusive words. And they sweep up you and me and all of us in this room, but they also expand far beyond these walls in places that maybe we're not very comfortable with. Because a lot of times when we talk about enlarging the kingdom, we can wave a flag and be really excited about it, but sometimes enlarging the kingdom looks very scary, maybe even offensive. Here's why. So we have this routine in our house. By the way, James mentioned I have a wife. I have 2 little girls, a 6-year-old named Alice, a almost 2-year-old named Ren. It's absolutely wonderful. But this is my 6-year-old Alice. And Alice is a blast. I truly do love this little girl. And if you knew her, you'd really like her too. But Alice and I have developed this ritual every year around this time of year, but prepping for Christmas. And we call it the toy purge. And I love the toy purge. Because they didn't tell me this before I became a parent. But from ages 0 to 3, all kids' toys are really big and bright and shaped like dogs. But then when a kid turns 4, all of a sudden, all the toys become microscopic. Just little bitty pieces and sharp little edges. And of course, my kids just go around my house like they're sowing seeds with Legos and Barbie arms and Shopkins and everything else. And all these little bits of toys and plastic just find themselves in different places of Alice's room. And it just is a mess. And we know that Christmas is coming. And we're really grateful that we have so many people in our lives that give our kids toys. But we know that more toys are going to pile up in their room. So we have to purge of the old stuff, the broken stuff, the stuff they've outgrown. So every year around this time of year, I walk into Alice's room with 2 boxes. One that says keep, one that says trash. And my job as a parent is to fill this box up and throw it all away. Alice hates the toy purge. So we do. We pile up all of the things that she's outgrown, the trinkets that she collects, and we just begin going through them. And these are literally things that I've pulled from Alice's room just this week. A pumpkin. Trash. This is underwear packaging. It's not underwear, it's the package that the underwear came in. By definition, trash. this. Sorry, dear, we're cutting the arts program. Joy to the world, your room's now clean. Trash. A little airplane. This thing. Trash, trash, trash. And of course, every time I pull something out, a balloon, and we'll keep this, we'll save that for later. An Easter egg. We didn't find it in April, we found it now. Take the candy out and trash. And every time I'm about to drop something into the trash box, and I say this, keep or trash. Every time. Trash, keep. Alice says, keep. And me, like sinners in the hands of an angry dad, dangling the Easter egg over the trash. We throw it away. She hates it. She's not very good at it. And to be honest, you can't really blame her because she's 6. And when you're 6, everything, and I mean everything, is treasure. Everything has value. And I've had a whole lot more experience in my life determining what is trash and what has value. I'm really, really good at making that decision, honestly. Because, well, I get to decide everything I want in my life. Every 2 years, guess what? I get a new phone. And this one becomes trash. And, well, every morning on the way to work, I go by Starbucks and I get to decide from the plethora of things on the menu what I want and what I don't want. Keep. And we get to decide what kind of fast food chicken we want. I did those at random. I have nothing against either of them. Actually, the correct answer is both. And I think that's honestly maybe even the definition of privilege, the definition of wealth, to get to have a choice in what is worthless and what has value. And I think a lot of times we take that consumerism, whether we like it to admit it or not, we take that consumerism out of things that in the end, don't really matter and into kingdom discussions, into determining those around us who has value and who doesn't. Because all of a sudden, what happens when you run into somebody who lives a different lifestyle than you approve of, or waves a different flag than you do, or who votes differently than you, or maybe the hardest at times is a family member who's hurt you? Because every time I hold something over the trash pile with Alice, and I say, trash? And she says, no, keep. I said, Alice, this is a plastic emoji thing. Why? Because it's special. Okay. What makes it special? It's mine. And I think Jesus says the same thing. In fact, you won't encounter one person, you won't bring one stereotype to mind that Jesus does not look at and say, they are mine. So how do we enlarge the kingdom? We do like Jesus. We pursue those who are His. And that's everybody. And we read this in 1 John. I tell you, if you just want a kick in the teeth read through 1 John. Because John really does set the standard pretty well to say, you want to live like a believer, you want to live like a follower of Christ, this is what this looks like. And we read in 1 John, it says this, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed His love among us. He sent His one and only Son into the world that we might live through Him. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and His love is made complete in us." 1 John 4, 7 through 12. You'll never encounter a person who does not fall into this category. And I said a few moments ago, if you want to follow Jesus, you probably ought to take notice of what Jesus is doing. Well, every time you look up in the Gospels, Jesus is eating a meal, is serving someone who fell on the outside of who we think should be in. So what does that look like? How do we do this here? You know, my hope really is, as James mentioned, I did grow up here, and this is a really special place to come home to. And I hope that on some level that I make this place proud. This congregation changed my life. And you're in a different building now, and a lot of you look really different now. Some of you are newer than you weren't here 18 years ago when I graduated. But I hope that Boulevard is and will continue to be a caring community of Christians. It's still on the website. I checked. It's there. And that requires a whole lot of patience and a whole lot of leverage and latitude to allow people to get this, to belong before they behave. Or belong before they believe. Because a lot of times we mix those B words up. And you got to behave, then you believe, and then now you're in. But what if Boulevard, what if College Heights, where I attend, what if our community, what if we could be a place that could say, hey, we want to stand for truth, and we want to stand for what's right and holiness and those types of things. But guess what? You're in. You can be a part. And the rest will work itself out. Because all too often, this is what happens. Alicia's going to come out and help me out with this. So I'm not saying this happens every time, but in a lot of churches, this is what happens. Alicia, have a seat. So just start blowing up that balloon. So you have a new person come to your church, right? And they're like what we would call a really good sinner, right? Like they are great at it. They check all the boxes. They do all the things. And look, we're all kind of messed up. We're all in process. I know we've all got issues. We're kind of all like an Oklahoma turnpike, just kind of always under construction, right? But this person who shows up on Sunday mornings, like, they don't just do the gray area things, like they're way, way over there. But guess what? They should just keep blowing. That's fine. You just keep blowing that. They show up and they get plugged in. Maybe they join a small group. They start serving, and they're growing. Like their faith is enlarging. But we've said, like, you can hang out here as long as you don't do A, B, C, right? As long as you don't do those things, you can stay. But guess what? People like doing A, B, and C. Keep going. And the next thing you know, they're growing. But sometimes Christians, well, we aren't the nicest to people who are still in process. Just do that again. But for some reason, they stick around. And yeah, they're not getting everything right, but they're kind of hanging in there, and next thing you know, they're growing and growing and growing. And we say, look, as long as you don't do these things, you're cool. But guess what? People do those things. I'll get another one. Go ahead, just go ahead. And can I, in the midst of some silliness, be somewhat serious? What happens? Yeah, exactly. And I feel like a lot of times we have to let people grow. We have to let people not be perfect. And like I said, I want you guys to care for holiness. I want you to hold doctrine up high. But I also want to see a lot of little balloons. And a lot of medium-sized balloons. And a lot of balloons that are in between. A lot of balloons that go flat. And then, you know what? Let's blow some air back into this and blow it back up. You're done.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Give her a hand. Because it's super easy, right? It's super easy to find excuses for others, but others, well, I don't feel like that's always the problem. I sometimes feel like the hardest thing at all to deal with, the hardest person to put up with, the hardest person not just to immediately throw in the trash, isn't someone that sits in the pews with you, but it's someone else. It's someone you know everything about. All their ups and downs, their thoughts, their failures. And that's you. It's like we feel like if you're on board with grace at all, it's for everybody else, but not for me. And maybe you're sitting here this morning and going, I know this. This is how I feel more than anything else. Me to have a decision to toss one person. No. I'm this. This is how I feel. And I want you to know this. His grace is sufficient for you. We turn back to Romans chapter 8, and we see this. What shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we face death all day long. We are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Keep trash. If you're in Christ, nothing can separate you from the love of God. Nothing. And if I can be even somewhat transparent, but I've had a really interesting journey with grace. And it's part of the bio. I grew up here. I've been in church since James showed up in my house on Georgia Avenue. But I don't think I really fully understood what grace was. It's kind of silly, but I think that for a long time I thought that I had found some sort of cosmic loophole. That I'd never doubted my salvation. But I always kind of lived with this idea that God is somehow just kind of mildly upset with me. Just irritated by me. It's like if my sin was a 9, then grace was just like a 9.2. Just barely enough. And it wasn't until a number of years ago when I think realized for the first time again that it's not just God just found a get-out-of-jail card for me, but God delights in me. He is madly in love with me. And I am special. Why? Because I'm His. And no matter what your bio looks like, and your backstory, and the things that you're still trying to untangle from the messes we've all made, God's madly in love with you. And His grace is more than enough for anything that you've done. And I don't know if this morning, if you feel like you're a person who is in the box, or you're a person who makes the decision about what goes in what box, I want you to know that if you're in Christ Jesus, everything's in. Everything is in. Why? Because we're His. And that's hard to swallow sometimes. I'm not saying it's easy. And enlarging the kingdom is really difficult. And hanging with people long enough to mess up a bunch and yet still say, no, you belong, is hard. But I also believe the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 28, when He commanded His disciples, and by proxy, now us, to go into all the world and make disciples, right? And He says this as He closes, and I will be with you always. Because Jesus is already doing this. The work of enlarging the kingdom was done thousands of years ago, and we just get to be a part of it now. And wherever God might be calling you to an office or to another country, He's already there. Because you can't invite someone to a place that you're not currently there. He's there. He's waiting and will be with you, as scary and as complicated as it might be. You don't have to have all the answers. You just got to go. And I look down at my skates and up at the floor and back at my skates again. And I probably didn't sit there long, but it felt like forever. And then all of a sudden, across the rink, I saw her again. And she saw me. She skated by and she gave me a little wave. Then she was gone. And then she came back around and smiled again. I smiled. Then she left again. She came around, waved. It's a circle. It's a ring. You get how it works. Then she was gone. Whew. I took a breath, and the announcer over the intercom said, "All right. Everybody off the floor. Couples skate only. Couples skate only." Moment of truth. I either go skate or go play Street Fighter. So I put on my skates and I laced them up really, really tight and stood up. And like a newborn giraffe, I made my way to the wall. And she came by again and extended her hand. And I pushed that onto the floor. This morning, I just hope that you'll do this. When it comes to enlarging the kingdom, would you take Jesus' hand? And would you push out onto the floor? The good news about this is Jesus already made the first move. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And some of you might need to skate down to the front and talk to an elder or a pastor here about what taking that step looks like. Some of you, I don't know. Maybe you just need to send a text message to a relative or a friend. Say sorry. Or say, can we get coffee this week? You don't have to draw a bridge illustration. You just got to build a relationship. Because Jesus is already there. And his hand is out. Let's go skate.